Welcome to the second annual Corporate Startup Lab and Echo Strategies Corporate Entrepreneurship Forum. I wanted to just take a couple minutes here before we get into the first of the panels starting at 1:15, just to kind of set the context a little bit for what you can expect over the next 6 days. Like so many of your businesses, we've had to move a lot of what happens at Carnegie Mellon to virtual. And so that includes this conference. But in some ways, I think like probably many of you are finding as well, this move to virtual creates some really unique opportunities. And so we've been able to get speakers from literally around the world to come join us for this forum over the next 6 days. So just as a reminder in terms of schedule, and then I'll walk through some slides, we'll be doing 1 Eastern to 4 Eastern each of the days except for Friday. So it's today and tomorrow, 1 to 4 Eastern. Friday, it will be 4 to 7 Eastern because we're going to have a special happy hour event that will be at the tail end of that. And then we'll go back to our 1 to 4 next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And again, I just could not be more excited about the content that we've put together and just the panelists, the presentations. I think this is going to be a really, really fun 2 weeks or 6 days here. So again, I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes setting the context for what you can expect and also getting synced up on some vocabulary. Before we say kind of anything about the forum, though, I do want to just take a moment and thank our 3 sponsors, Optum, Philips, and Lenode. Optum and Philips have done lots of stuff with the Corporate Startup Lab over the last 3 years and appreciate them continuing to support this event and make it possible. Lenode is a new relationship and maybe a new name to some of you guys. If you're not familiar with Lenode, they were actually kind of the AWS 3 years before there even was an Amazon AWS. And they've continued to be an independent cloud provider. And we'll be sending you some information on them later in the forum, but they actually have an offer for you to get $100 of free hosting. And again, looking forward to doing more with Lenode over the next few years. So again, thanks to Optum, Philips, and Lenode. I did want to just spend a minute here syncing on vocabulary. So we're calling this the Corporate Entrepreneurship Forum. Some of you who haven't heard this spiel before may be thinking like, well, corporate and entrepreneur, are those oxymorons, jumbo shrimp, that kind of thing? We don't believe so, right? We believe, and we have a fairly broad definition of entrepreneurship at the Schwartz Center at Carnegie Mellon. When we talk about entrepreneurs, we talk about people who look out into the world, see things in the world that aren't the way they should be, and build products and services that make the world the way it ought to be. And that may seem like a flowery definition, and certainly if you're tired like me and were late last night and got up again this morning watching the election, that may feel like an incredibly flowery definition right now. But I want to just point out, like when you think about entrepreneurship, think about all the different ways that your world is different than it was 2 years ago. Ignore the pandemic, if you will, so maybe even do this as of January, right? From the iPhone in your pocket to the Peloton in your den to the Tesla in your driveway, behind each of those 3 products, there was an entrepreneur who looked out, saw things in the world that were opportunities, and created products and services to realize that vision. Now, what's interesting is that there are types of entrepreneurships that are not what we would call startups, because the lab that we run here is called the Corporate Startup Lab, right? And we're focused in specifically on a subset of that, right? So if that's looking out into the world and seeing things as they should be, that could be a bakery or that could be an iPhone. We're focused on a subset of entrepreneurship, which we call startups. And next week we'll have Steve Blank join us as part of the forum. I think he was the first one to kind of frame startups like this. But the definition that we use, which is a hat tip to him, is a startup is a project that starts small with the goal of it becoming large, right? So the Peloton started as a small team, and now it's being used across the world for people to do fitness. The iPhone, right? There was a small team that first started working on that. Today, it's a massive part of Apple. Now, that leads to actually the other part of this, and this: can corporates do startups or can corporates be entrepreneurs? Those 3 examples I gave, 2 of them are what I would call traditional startups. But one of those is what I would call a corporate startup, right? It's a startup that starts small within a larger company with the goal of it becoming large, right? The iPhone was already part of a big company when it was introduced. Apple was a large company before the iPhone. It's just an even larger company today. And what we've been doing at the Corporate Startup Lab over the last 4 years is trying to help people figure out the ways to build those startups inside their companies. Because I actually have come to believe, and I'm seeing friends on here, including Estella Wu, who already said hi in the chat from Bosch. Like, I've gotten to know some of these companies. And what I've appreciated is that for certain types of companies, right, it's actually easier or makes more sense to start them inside a large company. And I think, frankly, we've gotten too focused on entrepreneurship inside traditional startups and missed these huge pockets of innovation that could be realized, and these sort of types of products and services that could be commercialized if created inside their large companies. And actually, Estella and I tomorrow afternoon will be talking about how she does that inside of Bosch as we talk about kind of startup and corporate partnerships tomorrow. Now, if that's why the world cares about it. But we have over 800 of you who are going to be part of this conference over the next 2 weeks, and you all work for companies. And one of the questions I think that's right for you to ask is not just why does the world need this, but why does my company need this? And the reality is, the reason your company needs to focus on this is because the things that made your company relevant will not be the things that keep them relevant, right? This is some research from Innosight, many of you may have seen, but it just shows the tenure of a company on the S&P 500 list has moved from 61 years in 1955 to 17 years in 2015. To contextualize that, that means that if 1955 you were the CEO of a company and got your company on the S&P 500 list, you'd feel good about your successor staying on that list and his or her successor staying on that list. Today, you're just hoping to make it out of your tenure, right? The pace of change is rapidly accelerating, and the things that kept your company relevant just won't keep them relevant any longer. And so we believe these corporate startup activities, or these activities that are adjacent and transformational innovations within your organization, are really the key to remaining relevant. So if you think about that 17 years and 2015, I think another thing that we can't overlook is like, wow, well, it's been a challenging year in a lot of ways in 2020. And so, as you might suspect, I think the trend line would expect that it will be even shorter for companies today. And there's interesting research about what happens to companies when they go through a recession. And I thought I would just share just a couple minutes on this before we get to our first conversation with First Round Capital. So this was work done by the current dean of the Harvard Business School. Many of you who are affiliated with Carnegie Mellon saw that the dean who's about to take over and be the next dean at HBS is actually a former Tepper faculty member, but this is the current dean. He and two of his colleagues looked across the past recessions and by cohort looked at how companies made investments and also how they cut costs. And they bucketed the companies into 4 different categories. And I think what's really interesting about this is that there's a large group of them, it's actually about 17%, that went out of business, right? And they did certain things. But the more relevant conversation for you and all the companies that you're part of is, what about this small subsegment, 9% of the companies they studied, that not only accelerated, but they actually came out even stronger out of the recession than they entered. And at the high level, they did something that if you spend any time with me or all of us at the Corporate Startup Lab, this should not be surprising to you, right? At the high level, what did they do? They stayed very close to their customers. If you don't know what to do, talk to your customers about it. While customers aren't great at telling you the solutions to their problems, they're incredibly insightful around the problems that they have. But at another level down, if you really look at the actual financial statements of these companies, you see a very common pattern. What they did is they were selectively defensive. They cut their costs where it made sense, but focused mostly on operational efficiencies, not just reducing the number of employees, or at least not reducing employees any faster than their peers and actually slower than their peers. But what they really focused on was developing new business opportunities. And really, I think if there's one thing that we want to talk about over the next 6 days together, it's that. We want to talk to you about how to develop these new business opportunities in your companies. And so I really have 4 goals for the forum, and spent a lot of time with Lou Masanti and Hallie Johnson to kind of put this together. And what we really want you to experience over the next 4 days is the following. First, we want to spend some time talking to thought leaders and experts around the best practices and the tools for this area of corporate entrepreneurship. And you'll see across the next 6 days, we'll weave in both academic thought leaders and authors and speakers and consultants and just a bunch of different people talking about, okay, what are the best practices and the tools around corporate entrepreneurship? We also want to do some deep dives on some different companies and do it across different industries, because we know that there are certain industries, especially finance, healthcare, mobility, and autonomy, where frankly those industries are just being transformed, and I think there's a lot that all of us can learn from that. The next thing that we're going to do is and this is something that that we've tried to continue from last year's forum, even though it's a little harder this year because it's virtual, right? We know that as valuable as the content is that we're going to give you, we know that often those connections that you make are as important as anything. And so we want to expose you to different transformative startups and thought leaders. And so across the next 6 days, at 5 different points, you're going to hear pitches from different startups that have solutions for large enterprises. So these are startups selling B2B solutions. They're going to tell you about what they're doing. I guarantee you not all of them will be relevant, but the pitches are going to be less than 10 minutes. This is just a chance for you to hear some new ideas from the outside of your organization. And then, and as you're experiencing it on this platform right now, we really didn't want this just to be like a Zoom webinar, right? I mean, we all have experienced quite a bit of Zoom fatigue, I'm sure, over the last 6 months. We wanted this to be more of a community. So we're using this platform, Run the World, instead of Zoom, to do exactly that, to make it easy for you to connect with each other. And hopefully you'll do that through the platform. Also, Friday night, we have a really interesting keynote to kick off Friday night at 4. That's Matt Fleckenstein and then a representative from Lockheed Martin and Case. They're going to talk about augmented and mixed reality. We're then going to do a panel with some CSL student alumni, hear where they are today. And then we're going to have a networking happy hour reception time. And the idea is that you'll get a chance to network with other attendees. So I know it's Friday night. I know we all have a lot going on, but I hope you'll join us from that 4 to 7 Eastern on Friday to actually make some connections across the community. The other way that we're trying to do that is starting today and across the next 6 days at 5 different points throughout the conference, we're going to do what I'm calling 5x5s. And the concept between 5x5s is that I'm going to have 5 different people across the 6 days answer 5 questions in about 10 minutes as a way for you to hear different people within the CSL community. So beyond all the other stuff, that's what those 5x5s are. Again, in 10 seconds, we're going to move over to the next session, which is a panel or is a discussion between me and First Round Capital. They have an amazing platform I can't wait for you to hear about. But I would encourage you now to move over there, and Alex and I will be on in 1 second.